questionnaires, and existing document or document review. As for the implementation of data collection, we will look into these three categories. First, analyzing the data. Second, evaluating the effectiveness of data collection and the feedback. Analyzing the data, the technique to analyze is varied from straightforward and simple to sophisticated statistical technique. Data analysis approach must be determined prior to data collection. For example, we might answer the question like how to analyze the data, type of analysis, by hand or computer, will they be coded? The data must be properly coded as it is important to draw inferences and conclusions. As for evaluating the effectiveness, the aspects that they look are the validity of data, are we measuring the right data, and the time to collect the data, the cost of data collection, the organizational culture and norms to decide which techniques best to the given organization. And lastly, the Houghton effect in data collecting. That is the effect the observer has on subject. And as for the feedback, the objective of feedback is to promote the understanding of the client system by its members. Typically, it consists of a series of meetings between the practitioner and client, whereby the practitioner will present the data analysis and the parties will discuss as well as to interpret the data. The feedback, as I mentioned earlier, also brings the diagnosis to completion and possibly prepares for a transition to plan change.
Hello everyone, my name is Suhaya. I will continue to explain about diagnostic models. As my colleagues mentioned just now about the diagnostic, actually is based on an understanding of how an organization function. Actually, organization development practitioner use diagnostic models to access organization. So diagnostic model basically play a critical role in providing a conceptual framework to understand better the organization. It also serve a roadmap to question and review how organization operate and describe the relationship among different features of organization. And this model also is useful for the organization to analyze the structure, culture and behavior. We have several types of diagnostic model. So in our presentation, we will highlight three of the model. The first one is the analytical model, second socio-technical system model, and the third is the force field analysis model. The analytical model is referred to the differentiation and integration model. The model was developed to study and understand interdepartment issue by conducting a careful diagnosis of the organization problem. It examines four characteristics of department: degree of department structure, the times orientation of members towards others, the interpersonal members orientation towards others, and organizational members orientation towards goal. And the data of these four characteristics provide a basis for structure or culture change in the department. This model objective is to help department achieve integration. The second model is the socio-technical system. This system contains two systems in each organization: social system and the technical system. Social system consists of interpersonal relationship, whereby the technical system consists of tasks, tools and activities of organization. The system are interrelated. The diagnosis determine how the system are interrelated and what type of feedback is required between the subsystem. The third model that we will highlight is the force field analysis model, originated by Kurt Lewin. Is general purpose diagnostic technique. This model view organizational behavior not as a static pattern but as a dynamic balance of force working in opposite direction. So in any organization situation, there are force that push for change and force that hinder change. So the force acting to keep the organization stable are called restraint forces that they put pressure on the organization not to change. Opposite force called driving force, but pressure on the organization to change. So if the forces for change and the forces against change are equal, so the result is equilibrium and the organization remains stable. Okay, so the analysis of force determines which force to increase or decrease to bring about change. The diagnostic phase presents some special problem because the diagnosis is one of the important stages in the OD process. The practitioner should be aware of the warning signal because when we're using the wrong change strategy, will either fail to produce the needed change or lead to unnecessary changes at the expenses client system. One of the signal is the confidentiality. The issue of confidentiality is a critical problem area in diagnosis process. So there are many similar examples indicating that practitioner cannot be too careful about how they handle confidential information. So this goes back to the trust that the practitioner must be able to develop with organization members. Overdiagnosis is a diagnosis goes on for so long that it's impossible to adopt a corrective program, whereby the crisis diagnosis is the OD practitioner is often danger of falling into the trap of attending only to the immediate short-term crisis and the client sees as immediate important. So this often result is dealing only with the conspicuous problem, whereas the more important but less visible ones may be missed. So the threatening or overwhelming diagnosis, basically the ordinary practitioner interacting with the client system in beginning to perceive possible problem area may confront the client about them. So if the diagnosis is too threatening or overwhelming, the client may resist or reject the entire change of the program. The practitioner of favorite diagnosis signal is tendency to fall victim into their own bias and selective perceptions, whereby the diagnosis system is referring to the tendency to focus on the system rather than on the underlying problem. So the OD practitioner may influence, say, by the data or high turnover rates, and in consequences, identify turnover as the problem. As a conclusion, the diagnostic phase is an important and critical step in the organizational development process, and it also encompasses both the client needs and the system.
Are you done with the slides? You lost it. Okay. So we are done, right? Oh.
Yes, are we done?
Okay, good. All right. Any thoughts, anyone? Has anyone been involved in an organization diagnosis?
No.
Yes.
No.
Sir, I think how about a diagnosis in the public sector? Because what I mentioned before in my presentation, how to determine the problem in the public sector.
How to see the problem in the public sector?
And then we want to diagnosis what the problem, because sometimes we always see we use the diagnosis problem in public sector because of we want to change in organization structure, like we want to make it more bigger or more less than
Yes.
the current. I think in the public sector, I always focus on that. Want to add more pejawatan, or want to reduce
So
the pejawatan.
mostly structural types of
Yes, yes, structural,
intervention.
only structural.
Yes.
And then we use the strategy how to structure it, but this organization by law. I think we improve by law so we can get more more pejawatan or more position in the public sector.
Mm-hmm.
I think the same for in the university, because sometimes we want to merge the department, merge the faculty, and then we need some more more pejawatan, and then we 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 uh, we, we call it a diagnosis.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. I think in this case, when you talk about organization development, right? Organization development deals with change, especially when there is a problem that you need to address. And usually organizations, they realize that there is a problem within the organization. One of the indicators, so we usually experience the symptom of that problem, right? The symptom of the problem, for example, in most cases would be productivity, reduced productivity. Or this would be the outcome of a problem, right? It is not the problem in itself because it is just a symptom of the problem. As a result of something, productivity goes down. So when you want to do an organization diagnosis, you want to find out why productivity has decreased, right? For example, you may not achieve your target that you have set out. Now that would be a symptom of the problem. We don't know yet the reason for that. So that is why organization diagnosis is done, to determine the reasons for that outcome or to determine the reasons for that symptom, right? So in other words, what we normally see are just symptoms. And in most cases, what people do is that they try to figure out why those problems arise without doing a proper diagnosis. And if a proper diagnosis is not done, so you would probably be guessing at what needs to be done, right? So if there is a reduced productivity, they then think, hey, wait, we probably don't have enough people. And in that sense, you begin to take in more people. If the problem, the cause of the problem is not the number of employees, then that would be that would not be the right solution. It doesn't matter how many staff or how many employees you increase, but the problem will persist because the problem lies elsewhere, right? We know that in OD, we may look at structural types of problem, we may look at behavioral types of problems, or we may look at technological types of problems, right? So those are the three problems that may arise. I've told you the stories. I've told you the story about ayam mas, for example, right? You remember? You recall ayam mas?
Yes.
The problem of ayam, not the problem. The story of ayam mas. Did I relate to you? Anyone? No? Yes? Maybe?
Sorry, doctor, can't remember.
You can't remember ayam mas. But you know what ayam mas is, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, ayam mas. How did ayam mas start? Ayam mas actually started as a unit within KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Okay.
Right? So that is why you see, when you see ayam mas, the packaging on ayam mas or the ayam mas label, it is somewhat related in terms of the colors to KFC, because it was once part of KFC Malaysia, right? So ayam mas then ayam mas was supplying processed chicken to KFC so that KFC can fry the chicken and sell them. So that was initially what Ayam Mas did. And if you remember, that was probably way back in the 70s, probably in 1975, 76, when Ayam Mas first started operating in Malaysia. Right? When KFC first started operating in Malaysia. And when, I don't know, maybe how many of you were around in the 70s? 76, 75, 76? No?
Mr. Lokman only.
I know Lokman.
No, not yet. Not yet, Prof. I born in 74.
Okay lah, 1 year old lah. So that's why I retired, I suppose. Yes, in 76, that was when Ayam Mas was started. They operated in Sungai Wang Plaza.
Oh.
Right?
Is it the first branch, Prof?
Yes, that was the first branch in Sungai Wang. And
Sungai
then
Wang
there was
Plaza.
also another branch. There was also another branch in Jalan Tuanku Abdul Rahman. It was at the corner, I think. Across that time, it was across Pilal store. Even Pilal store has moved, right? So it was on the side where you approach, on the other side where you approach Jalan Masjid India.
I
So
see.
corner, right at the corner of Jalan. In fact, then it was in front, adjacent to the sports store, GS Gill.
Oh, GS Gill, the famous one.
Yeah, it used to be. Now, I think now even GS Gill is not around. I haven't been to Jalan Tuanku Rahman for quite a number of years. But that was where the first, there was a KFC outlet there. And Kentucky Fried Chicken then, if you were to go in, you would be served on proper porcelain plates.
Wow.
Plates that are heavy and that can be broken, right? You'd have your Kentucky served on proper porcelain plates, and you would use fork and knives made of steel then. So it was just like any dining, almost like any fine dining shop, right? So you went in, and then there was also tablecloth, which was checkered tablecloth there. This was KFC way back in 1976, 75, 76, right? And then, okay, we get back to the story of Ayam Mas. Ayam Mas supplied processed chicken for KFC. So what they did was they were good at their work. So they, in order to supply, they had contract farmers. The model that they used was what was called the umbrella model, system payung, the umbrella system, in which they contracted farmers to rear the chickens, and then a period of 8 weeks or so, the chicken would be already grown up, and the farmers would get Ayam Mas to come and collect the chicken, right? So all the farmers had to do was to take care of the chicken. Ayam Mas supplied the day-old chicks, supplied the farmers with the feed, and all the farmers needed to do was to supply the chicken when they actually reach a certain weight. And this was usually about 1.8 kilograms per chicken, if I'm not mistaken then, right? So that chicken was actually sent to KFC, and KFC would then, was sent to Ayam Mas at the factory in Kelang at that time, and Ayam Mas would process chicken, and the chicken would then be sent to all the KFC outlets. Now, if you look at the chicken process, now the farmer sends the chicken to the processing plant, right? So Ayam Mas at that time was just it wasn't Ayam Mas yet, to KFC, and KFC would receive the chicken, and they would process the chicken. The first thing that they do is check the chicken, and if the chicken is all healthy, they would slaughter the chicken. So you would have a group of people who actually slaughtered chicken. Right? And after the chicken was slaughtered, they were actually defeathered, right? And defeathering it just involves the process of taking the feathers out. And if you have seen last time, now I don't know at the market. Last time we were at the market, you could find people selling live chicken. So they would slaughter the chicken on site at the market, and then they would put the chicken in a barrel like a, well, the barrel had prongs in it. And when the barrel spins, they would pour water into the barrel, and the prongs would defeather, the rubber prongs would defeather the chicken, right? So this was defeathering, and then they would put the chicken onto the next stage where they actually gutted and clean the chicken, right? Take out the insides of the chicken. And the next step after that was to cut the chicken into 8 pieces. That was KFC's standard operation procedure. Cut the chicken into 8 pieces and then clean it again, and was ready for delivery to KFC. Okay, and this was the process of the chicken at that time. And at that time, I think they started off with producing only about 4,000 chicken a day, and they increased that production to 12,000 later on, right? So if you look at the chicken process, right, the chicken process is not easy. One, you need people to do the work, the operators. And these operators were one, the slaughterers, the people who slaughtered the chicken. And number two, the people who defeathered the chicken. Number three, people who cleaned the chicken by gutting the chicken, cleaning the innards. Number four, those who actually cut up the chicken into 8 pieces. And of course, finally, would be people who actually package the chicken. And as you all know, working with chicken is not something that is, well, that is enjoyable, right? Have you all cleaned chicken before? Loman, you slaughtered chicken, right?
Rarely, bro.
Rarely. Anyone else
Now
have
buy
slaughtered?
ready-made.
Yeah, nowadays somehow we rarely slaughter our chicken, except when you go back maybe to the kampungs and to your kampung houses where you actually chase after the chicken and slaughter the chicken. Anyone ever done that? I know, okay, Lokman probably rarely, but I remember doing that. But even if you were to buy chicken that was already processed at the supermarket, you take it home and you want to clean it, right? Now, working with chicken, number one is the odor of the chicken. The chicken has a certain smell, right? And if you work with chicken the whole day, not just one chicken, even with one chicken, you will have that smell. By the way, do you know how to get rid of that smell? Anyone knows? How do you get rid of the chicken smell? You know when you wash with soap and then you smell your hand, the smell is still there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
What other ways are there to get rid of that smell?
Wash with flour, bro.
Wash with flour, right? Yes.
Flour, yes. Using flour.
You've done that?
Yes, I've done that.
Did the smell go away entirely?
A little bit.
No.
A little bit, right?
No.
Some people wash with lime.
Lime, yeah.
Even then, the smell doesn't go away. But today, I want to share you one good way. Use toothpaste.
Oh, okay.
Just put a bit of toothpaste, about the size of a peanut, right? And then use it just like a soap, and then wash it. It works for me. Try that.
Oh.
Well, at least if you haven't learned anything today, you learn how to do that.
For chicken only or beef also, bro?
I suppose, yeah, for beef, but beef to me, it doesn't smell that strong. Chicken to me smells a lot, right? But yes, it's a good way. If you can get rid of bad breath, you can get rid of chicken smell.
Yeah.
Okay? All right. But for people in the industry, it is something that they have to deal with. And it is not pleasant, right? And as a result of that, they have very high employee turnover, right? That is normal employee turnover. And when people leave, they have to find replacements, right? So this was one of the biggest problem for KFC at that time, right?
Oh,
But again, if you look at how Ayam Mas later became its own operations, as demand grew, right? So Ayam Mas was getting much more. They got much better at what they did, right? And after a while, KFC began to think that, wait a minute, Ayam Mas is a cost center, right? It doesn't make money for KFC, but it does work for KFC, an essential part of work, right? But they are really good at it. And this was when KFC actually decided to do some restructuring where they actually turn this unit into a subsidiary. And as such, what happened was that Ayam Mas was formed. Ayam Mas, being a subsidiary of KFC, was autonomous. They were, in fact, a business entity by itself, right? And so, as a business entity, they had to find their own money, right? Of course, KFC provided the initial grant investment for them to begin. And yes, but being a subsidiary, now they have to make their own profits. They have to be, they have to remain alive, right? And as such, they needed to make money. How did Ayam Mas grow? What did they do?
They also have their own outlets.
Yeah, but before they had outlets,
They have also frozen food.
They provide the poultry product to supermarkets.
yes. In fact, that's how they started, right? Because they needed to find ways to make more money. Supplying chicken to KFC, yes, KFC would pay them for the chicken that is being supplied, although they are the subsidiary, but they are doing a business. And as such, they supply chicken to KFC. That is one way of their business. But after a while, they begin to think, hey, wait, we are not going to be able to grow just by supplying chicken
KFC.
to KFC, right? So they needed to find ways to grow. So what they did was, all right, number one, supply to KFC. Supply processed chicken to supermarket. And this was when they began to grow their business. So just from 4,000, they increased to 8,000, 6,000, 8,000. So the growth of chicken being processed at their plant grew they grew arithmetically, I suppose. It wasn't a tremendous exponential growth, but it grew, right? So 11,000, 12,000 chicken. And of course, when you had more chicken, you had to have more workers to cope with the work, right? So this was one, they supplied supermarkets with processed chicken. And then number two, they began to diversify their products, right? So instead of just fried chicken, they probably, the next step was actually, the simple step was actually to produce, for example, minced meat, right? Ground chicken. And ground chicken, then they began to produce things like sausages. They began to produce roasted chicken, right? So this was part of the growing process. And then after that, they began to open their own outlets, right? So you began to see Ayam Mas outlets where they sell, apart from selling their own raw products, chicken, processed chicken, sausages, and so on, they also began to serve or at least sell roasted chicken, processed chicken, right? And so it grew. You can see that the growth of chicken by day went up to 48,000, 96,000, and 100,000+ chicken to be processed a day. And when there are more chickens to be processed, of course, we need to have more workers. All right. So the increase in the number of workers. When in the beginning, most of the workers, where do you think they came from? Where do you think
local people?
In the 70s?
KFC.
Mostly it was domestic. And most of their workers in the beginning were from Kelantan, right? Because Kelantan people were very adventurous. They migrated to other states, and so Kelantanese were there. But after a while, the Kelantanese also began to become much more prosperous and did not want to work and do manual work. And this was when they sourced their workers from the East Coast, Sabah and Sarawak, right? And after a while, people from Sabah and Sarawak also, as Malaysia began to develop, also did not favor manual work, and we begin to take in workers from after Sabah and Sarawak, where? Indonesia, right? So we have Indonesian workers. And Indonesian workers, after then I think sometime in the 80s, late 80s, we stopped taking in Indonesian workers because Indonesia did not want to send their workers about because there were some problems, and so we had to source workers from after Indonesia. No, Bangladesh, right? So Indonesia, Bangladesh. So when the Bangladesh, what's that? Well, Bangladesh, yes.
Yen said India, is it?
India, not. Yeah, later on India, but there were not many Indian workers, mostly Bangladeshi, right? But if you notice, the Indonesians somehow could not get along with the Bangladeshis. They always fight. And if you notice, in the work, for example, or the other thing that also as more workers, you notice that processing chicken, right? Of course, there was the defeathering, and the next part was cutting up the chicken into parts.
8 pieces.
Right? 8 pieces. How do you do that? You do that manually with a knife. And the knife has to be very sharp to cut the chicken out. Now, it is also a very dangerous work because if you are not careful, then probably this is where KFC got their tagline, finger licking good. Right? You may cut your fingers off. Of course, they had to prevent that. How do you prevent injury at work when you are using knife? Anyone has any idea?
Maybe wearing
Remember, you have a
plastic
sharp
glove.
knife, and you need to prevent injury. How could you do that?
Machine cut?
Machine cut.
Well, they did not have a machine then yet. Yes, that would be the best solution. But then it was still very manual. You have a knife?
Maybe wearing plastic glove.
Plastic glove?
Wearing.
Well, of course, the knife can easily cut through plastic glove, but you're on track there. Have you seen steel gloves or chain gloves?
Iron Man. Iron Man.
Yeah, if you see all, I think not all movies, you see movies about the medieval times where they wear armor, right? Where they went to war with swords and bows and arrows. People wore, or the soldiers wore, armor. And some of the armor, you would notice those chain gloves. The gloves that are made of chain, they will put, and also they put probably in the parts where they need to move, right? So that chain glove made of steel was actually part of the tools or equipment that they wore. So on one hand, the hand that they used to hold the chicken, they would put on the steel gloves and then they would cut. Because when the knife hits the chain glove, it would not go through steel. And so that in that way, your hands are protected from the sharp knives, right? But the thing is that it is heavy, not pleasant work yet, right? So this caused that high turnover. The other thing is that Bangladeshis and Indonesians, they can never get along. Anyone knows the reason why?
Language?
Yeah.
Language, well, language, they can somehow find a way to talk. But that doesn't make them fight.
Because
Somehow
They're
fight
proud of their
broke up.
country.
because Indonesian girl being caught.
Yes, that has something to do.
Bangladeshi.
You
Locals
notice,
just
yeah.
like Bangladeshi, not like Indonesians.
No. The
Indonesian
Indonesian,
girl prefer Bangladesh because they
Hygiene.
you're somewhat right. You're somewhat right. Remember, the Bangladeshis that came to Malaysia are all men. You don't see any Bangladeshi women.
No.
Right? But for Indonesians, both men and women come over to Malaysia to work. And so there were Indonesian women. And the Bangladeshis, when they sought women, right? Of course, sometimes even Malaysian girls are attracted to Bangladeshis, right? But the Bangladeshis mostly sought Indonesian workers, who are the ladies. And the Indonesians somehow don't like that.
Not happy.
They're not happy, right? Among the Indonesians also, they may fight. There are two groups, or at least two groups of Indonesians that can never get along with each other. Anyone knows?
Madura, the first
Madura
one.
and what's the other?
Aceh.
No, not Aceh.
Madura and Flores. Madura and Flores.
Yes. Flores. So the Maduris and the Flores could never get together.
Along.
They will also fight. This is because of
Madura and what?
So
Madura
fight
Flores.
were possible at
Flores.
Yamas. And especially when you have knives and steel gloves, it became much more violent in the sense that people could get killed. And this was when Ayamas had to figure how to sort out this problem. Remember, it is a problem. The symptom is people are fighting. So they have to understand what the problems are in order to solve it. One easy way of providing solution to problem is to ensure that the shifts don't have people who actually come from different countries, right? Especially when you have Flores, you have to take into account when you have Maduris, you have Flores, you don't put them together on the working floor because then they might fight. So you put them, the solution, the intervention is to put them on different shifts, right? So understanding the problem provides a solution to that. The same thing with Bangladeshis and Indonesians, right? They cannot work together, put them on different issues. And somehow IMS found out these problems and they actually sorted out the problems through different shifts, right? Yes, there is one where you have the behavioral problems.
Prof,
Yes,
Prof, I just want to share.
yeah.
There is there is a company in Japan called JR Line.
Yes.
JR Line is a railway stations railway train company that provides services to the people of Japan.
Yes.
So this JR Line has a subsidiary that produces the payslip and publication. So what unique about this company, how they solve problem, they employ a person with disability. Okay, among them are autism and those who are deaf.
Yes.
So since they are working with machines, one way of solving a problem of unemployment among the person with the disability, they put these deaf people to that machine running place, so that they lessen the claim of people who can cause hearing impact because of working
Hearing
in that
injury,
situation.
they reduce claims from hearing injury.
Yes, so I think this is something that organization can look into to minimize a problem. So you have disabled people that who are deaf and they will not have any injury if they went to that kind of place with high sound and all. So this is, I think this is creative.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So you are actually addressing two problems. One is the getting people who are disabled work, right, employment, and two, you are actually, if you're getting deaf people, then you don't have to worry about having buying earmuff. It's not much, those hearing issues, I suppose. Yeah. Yes, true. Right. So that is an example of how companies may solve employment problems, right? But for IMAS, as you notice, they need more people then because they need to produce or they need to process a lot of people. So they continue to increase their workers until at a point of time that they found difficulty in sourcing workers, right? And one way to do it, of course, when you have labor problems or lack of labor, one way is of course to go into automation, right? And KFC and IMAS actually, the first automated machine was their slaughtering machine. Have you seen an automated slaughtering machine?
No.
You actually put chicken you hang chicken on hooks at their neck, right? And then as the chickens move on the conveyor, there will be knife that actually, usually a rotating knife, right? So that, in a way, well, in terms of whether it is a halal issue, of course, IMAS consulted the religious department about the issue. The main thing about halal is that the jugular vein of the chicken must be severed, entirely severed. As long as that is accomplished and the chicken is allowed to drain all its blood, then it should be okay, right? And of course, there was people who were actually, that you could actually recite mass Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and that is also sorted out. So everything is sorted out, but then what they have is a machine that replaces the need for having people who actually slaughtered chicken, right? So automation machine. And number two machine that they would use is the machine that actually cut up the chicken into.
Cutting machine.
Yes, a cutting machine. And this, there was none in Malaysia. right? There was no machine that actually cut up chicken into smaller pieces. So what they did, what KFC and what Ayam Mas did was actually to send their own technician and work with a company in Germany to produce a machine, or at least that could help them to cut up chicken the way that they wanted to. So in the end, they came up with such a machine that helped to reduce the requirement for people to process chicken. So now only people to manage what they need to operate or to supervise the operations of cleaning the chicken, but they have all mechanized the process of cutting and slaughtering chicken. What I am trying to demonstrate here is that these problems come up all the time with organizations as they grow, right? We discussed, for example, growth cycle last time, and this also happens in all organizations when they grow. There will be a demand for more employees. There will be a demand for better ways of production. This is the story of Ayam Mas. So if you notice the three organization development interventions of structure, behavioral types of transformation, and also technological transformation are evident in Ayam Mas. What were the structural transformation? Ayam Mas?
From small department to a company.
Okay, one is that you form department. One, of course, in the beginning, the subsidiary, turning Ayam Mas into subsidiary is a structural type of intervention that is carried out by KFC, right? So restructuring in terms of turning that unit into a subsidiary called Ayam Mas. That is an example of a restructuring process. And Ayam Mas also did further restructuring in the terms that it began to think about how to increase its growth, right? So to send processed chicken to supermarkets, that is one way of structural interventions. They are actually looking at their business model into thinking what else they can do in order to increase their income, to increase their profitability. So selling to supermarkets, diversifying their products, opening their own outlets, right? Those are all actually structural types of interventions. Okay, and even hiring, employing people, right? Looking into possibilities of getting people from Sabah and Sarawak to work at their plant, getting people from Indonesia, getting people from Bangladesh, right? All these are actually structural types of interventions, all right? And then there is also behavioral intervention. What are some of the behavioral interventions?
How the company managed the two groups of foreigners, the Bangladesh and the Indonesian.
Okay. That would be structural. By having them work on different shifts, right? That would be much more of a structural type of intervention. Now, behavioral type of intervention, yes, number one, probably that also could be considered to be structural behavioral in the sense that they have to prevent fights, right? So the main thing is that the behavior is fighting, and the intervention is to reduce the possibility of people fighting on the work floor, right? But here, if you notice, one of the biggest behavioral interventions that they needed to do was in hiring people, that recruitment, because every time we recruit people in the industry, you need to train them, right? You need to train them how to cut up the chicken. Right? You need to train them how to use the equipment. These are all behavioral training, is an example of behavioral type of intervention, right? And then, of course, anything to do with people, you prevent them from fighting, right? That will, of course, be behavioral type of intervention. Where different shift, yes, but that is much more structural type of intervention, right? Training, and then having people change their behavior so that they don't fight, they begin to accept their co-workers more, right? And those are behavioral. And then there's also technological type of intervention. One good example would be wearing the steel gloves or chain gloves. That would be a technological intervention, because technical or technological intervention involves any use of tools at the workplace, right? Using machines, right? That slaughtering machine, that would be a technological type of intervention. And then getting machines to cut up your chickens into smaller parts, that would be also an example of intervention, technological intervention. So in the case of Ayam Mas, we see all three types of interventions at work. But to be able to come up with those interventions, they have to do a proper diagnosis into looking at what is actually the real problem, right? The problem of people fighting, right? Different groups fighting. You know, the symptom is just people fighting at the workplace. But somehow you have to diagnose who are fighting, why are they fighting, how are they fighting, right? So that in itself is the diagnosis. Right? And also you have to diagnose how many workers you need for each type of process at the workplace, right? So this also goes the same for the public service, to determine what kind of people, how many people, and what qualifications are needed to fill in the vacancies at work, right? But to be able to do that, you must run a diagnosis to understand the type of work and also to understand the type of competencies that are required at that particular vacancy, right? So if you look even at the public service, there are many problems. And last time, a lot of people attributed those problems. Usually, what do they say? They say, why, when there is low productivity, or when there is work is not being done as it should be, what would people say the problem is? Last time, it was always attributed to attitude. Remember? Or we have bad attitude of workers. And usually when they diagnose, well, not by collecting data and finding out what the real problem, when they actually suspect that the problem is attitude, what would be the intervention? I think most of you have gone through this.
Maybe government introduced this exit policy.
This is data. This is recently, right? Exit policy. Yes, that would be an intervention because they have actually done proper diagnosis, and one way is to reduce the deadwoods, people who are not actually working, and they've introduced the exit policy because looking into the problem is not easy to fire people, terminate the services of people. So they have to come up with a proper plan of termination. Yes, that is an intervention. But last time, what managers or what top management mostly do is to send people for team building,
BTN. Oh.
right?
Building.
So that is why team building is so popular, because
So
most
popular.
people attribute problems to attitudinal, right? And to them, to change attitude problem is to have people to be able to work together and have a better attitude at work. And that is why they send people from team for team building. I'm sure most, if not all of you have gone for team building, right?
Yes, bro.
And sometimes even 2 or 3 times. Throughout my career, I think I can identify at least 3 times that I've gone for team building, right? And none of them work. Right? Okay, so that is diagnosis and intervention. It has something to do with intervention. I have said, I think, yes, the models that you presented, social technical model, analytical model, right? And of course, the force field analysis is known, well known. I think you can go to the literature and look out there, right, into types of intervention and types of diagnosis. But one diagnosis that I found quite useful and quite simple, I think you can use this in your own work later on. I've sent it to your WhatsApp group. Can you open that?
Not received yet.
Right? I don't know yet how to download. Share screen, open the WhatsApp. Oh yeah, okay, that's right. Where's my WhatsApp? Let's see. I'm going to WhatsApp. I got my assistant to help me out. Once I know this better, then I can. There you go.
Doctor, maybe I share the screen.
Yeah,
and anybody see it?
I've got it. Oh, so you've done it for me. Okay, that's good. Thank you. All right. So this is the white. Well, it says there. I'm not sure. WISBORD. WEISBORD. It's called the WISBORD 6-box model, or sometimes people just say WISBORD model. Oh, okay. Eka, just a minute. So what this model does is that it helps you to look into the operations of the organization from the perspective of the goals of the organization. So this begins with the purpose of the organization, and the purpose of the organization is related to the goals of the organization. So, for example, if we have Ayam Mas, what is the purpose of Ayam Mas? Is just to supply. Number one, of course, to supply processed chicken.
Supply.
Right? That would be the main initial purpose. And then as they become a subsidiary, they begin to have other purposes. Of course, number one is to make profit. Right?
Okay.
When they were part of KFC, they did not have the purpose of making profit. Their purpose was initially just to supply processed chicken to KFC. But as they became a subsidiary, then that purpose changed. That purpose changed into making profit. So they had to think about how are they going to make profits. And so they begin to think about structure. Of course, the initial structure was already there, where they had farmers supply live chicken through an umbrella system. And when the chicken was delivered, to the plant, they went through that process, slaughtering the chicken, cleaning the chicken, degutting the chicken, and also cutting up the chicken into smaller pieces, and also to package the chicken. So that was the initial structure of the work. But as they began to become a subsidiary, they had to think about developing other structures. So, for example, they had to come up with their own marketing unit, a marketing unit that had to think about how they're going to market processed chicken. And then when the number of chickens increased, they had to find a structure on how to get the work done, right? So structure is always an ongoing process. You need to think about how that structure can support the purpose of the organization. So that is how structure and purpose are related. You have structure, and the structure should be able to support the purpose of the organization, right? And then in the organization, you also have to think about rewards, right? How to get people to further increase productivity, right? Of course, the rewards talk about incentives, right? And so this also deals with the remuneration system, so that number one, you can maintain your workers so that the turnover can be reduced. And nowadays, we talk about the reward system to think about talent management. How are you going to retain talent in your organization, right? So the reward is another box within the organization. And also, you have to think about the mechanisms of getting the work done. And this is where the technologies comes in. And for IAMAS, they think about the technology of reducing injury at work by using steel gloves, right? And then when their production began to increase, they began to think about mechanization. These are the mechanisms that are considered as part of the WISBORD model. And finally, work in organization is heavily dependent on interdependent work, where people have to come together to work as a team, where work is divided up into smaller tasks, and in the end, those tasks have to be put together, right? So relationships become very important. And in the case of IAMAS, those relationships deal with how people interact with each other, and also how conflicts come into play, right? So that deals with relationships with the organization. And within all this, there is the leadership or the management that keeps on thinking about how all these things are put together so that the organization becomes productive, right? And of course, we have the external environment, because the organization is a system. And as a system, it is semi-permeable to the effects of the external environment. And I think nowadays, nothing more is as, I suppose, as illustrative as having COVID-19 as the external environment that affects the workplace, right? So in the case of COVID-19, this is the external environment that affects the organization systems. And we can see that this is actually a global widespread phenomenon, right? And the effects are going to be long lasting. There are people who predict that we may even have the impact that is up to 5 years. Of course, right now, we are beginning to feel the effect, right? Businesses closing down, the first indication of the effect of COVID-19 on the organization. So you'll find that the WISBORD model is very useful in looking into how the organization works, and also to determine where you need to look at when problems arise in organizations. Okay, thank you for sharing that, Zheng. And now I'll open up to questions and thoughts. So the difference in OD, one of it is of course in the diagnosis, right? The need for doing a diagnosis sense that you need to pinpoint the cause of the problem, the root of the
Doctor,
problem. Yes.
Doctor, can I ask one question?
Yes, please.
Can you share one of the effective organization diagnosed in public service that you know?
In public service, well,
Yes, in the public service.
model is a good start, right? Whiteboard model is a good start into looking at the organization's operations and how it achieves its goal, right? So just having that gives you a comprehensive tool for you to analyze what works, what doesn't work within the organization, right? So begin with the purpose and see whether that purpose is supported by all the other functions of the organization, right? You see whether the structure is there, right? Does the structure allow for process to happen? Is the workflow efficient and effective? Number two, then you can go into looking at are the incentives or rewards suitable or relevant for that kind of structure and purpose. And then looking into the helpful mechanisms and then looking into the relationships and leadership of the organization. That would give you an early indication of what needs to be done, right? Of course, when you call in the consultant, each consultant would have each consultant would have his or her own tool in, right? Some, for example, may use the scoreboard in looking at productivity, right? Some may look into social technical systems, right? How people interact with each other, right? So there are many tools out there, and the tools, like I said, there's no appropriate tool, there's no best tool to be used at all times. But number one, you must ensure what kind of or where does the problem exist. So start out with the whiteboard model to help you gain a better understanding of what the problem is, right? For example, the last time I talked about the Blake and Mutan's grid analysis. Well, the grid analysis is a tool, but it does not work all the time. It does not work in all organizations, right? So there is no one answer or definite answer. Oh yes, this is the best tool, right? The best tool is determined by understanding where the problem comes from, right? If there's a relationship issue, then you may want to use a socio-technical interrelation tool or looking into a socio-technical system because it is part of how people deal with their social environment and the technical environment. Okay. Thanks, Amir, for the question.
Prof, one question, please.
Yes, please.
Prof, it's not mistaken. A few weeks ago, Dr. Hisham shared his thought about the OD consultant regarding this diagnostic. So whereby the organization itself must be honest and sincere to the consultant when they want the consultant to change the what we call to make restructuring or what, and then what being suggested by the consultant should be agreed first by the organization. If not, so there's nothing the consultant can do.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because if you look at the diagnostic process, it's all a matter of collecting data. And in collecting data, you need to get cooperation from the organization. people must be willing to give the honest answers, like you said. They must be truthful in providing answers. So the more you hide, then the more your problems will not be seen or diagnosed or analyzed by the consultant. And if you notice that once the consultant has done the analysis, there is the feedback where the consultant presents the findings from the analysis, the results of the diagnosis, right? And the results of the diagnosis, when the consultant presents those results, then it's up to the organization to see whether those results are actually true. Of course, the consultant presents findings from the data that he or she has. So the purpose of the feedback is to actually get the agreement from the organization about the validity of the findings, whether those findings are true or not, whether they are relevant or not. Okay, so if the organization agrees that yes, that is the problem, and this is when the consultant will then propose, okay, so if these are the problems, these would be the interventions that could be done. So the consultant presents the interventions, and again, it's up for the organization to support those interventions. Because if the organization doesn't agree and support those interventions cannot be applied anyway. Right? So that feedback interaction between the consultant and the organization is always important. One, in order to get the data, and number two, to get agreement from the organization.
Doctor.
Let's before I
Doctor.
Yes.
Last time we used to have this so-called pemandu. You see, they recruit people from various ministries and agencies to form a group of lab technical committee group, so on. Is that considered as
go ahead.
Is that considered as diagnosis as well?
Well, the Pemandu is actually a change management group, right? So as a change management group, they have to do the diagnosis and they have to come up with the interventions. In other words, Pemandu should understand what the problems are within the public service. So Pemandu is actually a change management unit within the public service. And I think before Pemandu, Mampu also acted, especially in terms of technology.
They said they used to say Pemandu is the master consultant for the government because they got paid higher incentive. Their salaries are also not equivalent to government, and they use our resources for their own. And then they got to present it to the top government senior official.
Yes.
And then they were praised for that. But how the work is being done by the various ministries.
Of course.
This is what consultant. The word the cons very important.
Not really.
They're very good.
They are the change management. Yes, change management. Usually the consultant is the change manager, right? So that's what it is. They are the consultant. And of course, when you want to initiate change, in the end, it's the organization that has to change. And for the organization to change, of course, it will be the people within the organization to do the work. But, well, yes, in a way, well, that happens, I suppose. That happens.
Maybe the key point of change is come from the top, Prof, because always the top management afraid to change. Like us, executive level, we are not losing anything if the organization change because we still at executive level. But those place have a secure place on the top might be not happy or might be worried about their position. Either they are being promoted, or they will be transferred out. So a lot of advantages, incentive might be lost. So different of the that's different from my perspective.
Yes, true. Because in the end, the question is who is going to be more affected by the change, right? Now, of course, top management in the end, they are accountable and they are responsible for everything that happens within the organization, right? If things don't work, they are the ones who have to answer to whoever is higher, right? Of course, that's top management. In business, they have to answer to the shareholders, right? And they might lose their job if they have failed at what they needed to do. Yes, who gets affected most? And you say the executive level probably won't be affected. Well, unless there is a VSS or unless there is where you may lose a job, that could be a big effect also, right? So right now, for example, a lot of people may not be able to have a job anymore after COVID. Now, who is going to be affected? Of course, people in the lower level, right? Well, it goes through the chain, right? From the top to the executive and to the lower subordinates. And anytime there is a change, people will be affected, but the degree of change will depend on who will be affected most, right? Not only gain, but also people may lose some of the benefits that they have enjoyed in the past. So that is the reason why people sometimes are against change. They resist change. Now, I was saying just now before I forget, there is a request for group work to be converted into individual work. Is everybody agreeable to that?
I agree.
Agree?
Possible,
Okay.
Prof.
All right, then let's just put it this way. If you prefer to work individually, then you may work individually. But for those groups who have started to work as a group, you may continue as a group work, group assignment. Is that fair?
Okay, fair, Prof.
Right?
Thank you.
So,
Thank you,
Thank
Prof.
you, Prof.
for those who want to work individually,
Yes.
you may disband your group and work individually. But for those groups who may have started on their group work, they may continue to submit as a group assignment. Right?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. Brilliant. Brilliant.
Okay.
How about the presentation?
I don't think, well,
Need to present.
I don't think we may have time for presentations. Okay. But in the end, I think if anyone, the purpose of the presentation is for you to be able to get feedback on your work, right? Because some people don't want to present, it's okay. But for those who want to present, you are very much welcome to do so, right? If not, then we don't have to worry about presentations, right? The whole purpose of the presentation is so that other people can look at your group, at your work, and then we can actually give you feedback. Okay?
Thank you, Dr.
Prof, talking about diagnostic in change process. Okay, I take example in what happened in Malaysia Airlines Berhad. So because from previously we know from the early 60s, 70s, very good business, but coming to 90s and 2000, a lot of challenges. Yesterday, I just saw National Geographic people. So that's I think Aer Lingus. the famous airlines in Ireland. They also established 20 years over, but very constant, stable, and even they rebrand an image. But I think the content of the process is very good. They not no need to show off the all cantik girls to be their ground staff, because and then my wife also said, there see, no need to have a cantik girl to, as long as they know how to entertain passengers and then how to create a good image to the company. Compare what happened to MAS, I think because we are spending more money on promotion or advertising, but at the end, the prospect is not good enough because we already having a challenge with competing with Emirates, even though from Qatar Airways, British Airways, Singapore Airlines, of course. And nowadays, I think the MAB quite sustained because we haven't heard a lot of rumors regarding their loss or their what you call kerugian before compared to the last few years. So
Well,
I think they do the diagnostic, right, Prof? But I don't know the end result.
Before that, it all depends on the business model that you choose, right? And the business model also, part of it is about marketing, where you're going to place your service, right? And for the case of MAS somehow has positioned its service in a more exclusive, higher position. They're trying to appeal to people through their business class and also through their service, and that is why you pay more if you want to fly MAS. You see, these are all based on the business decisions that MAS undertook in trying to develop a business model that they think would be best for them to compete in the airline business, right? So it just so happens that both MAS and SIA and also Thai Airways position themselves to be on the higher level of service. And as such, we needed to compete with them. Of course, Singapore has been able to weather, to be able to have a better business. I mean, the business model is much more relevant to Singapore because Singapore is considered to be a hub in terms of travel within this region, right? And of course, also Singapore being very aggressive and also well-backed of investment was able to fare much better in terms of competition with MAS. So in a way, if there's anything, probably we can say that MAS chose the wrong business model, right? And if you notice now, a lot of airlines are actually trying to sell off their A380s, the big planes, because no one is flying, right? So again, although I'm belaboring the point, COVID-19 has a big effect, especially in the travel industry. And airlines are one of those biggest casualties to COVID-19, right? So to answer to Lokman, it is the business model that was initially chosen that determined how airlines were able to fare in their own industry.
Okay, thank you, bro.
I think some of the biggest failure of MAS is putting wrong person at the wrong position.
Oh, well, that could be one of it. And of course, there are a host of other problems. And of course, you just cannot come up with some possible answers unless you do a proper diagnosis, right?
Yes.
Heard of the problems, there are some, but we will not speculate on the real problem. Unless
Any specific example from Yen?
what's that?
Yen, Mas should take Prof. Gideon and Dr. Hisham as consultant in future.
No, even I think even as consultant, it'll be very difficult to solve because somehow masks are so stuck. Well, they are actually stuck in the ways that they do things, right? So number one, well, you can compare, for example, benchmark mass to SIA, benchmark mass to Thai Airways, for example, right? These are the airlines that actually focus on services to attract people, to attract customers. And of course, if you look at AirAsia, they have a different business model, right? Aer Lingus, I don't know. I think SIA was the most profitable airline before this. Can't think of anything else. Both Etihad and Emirates are very high cost airlines, and I don't think they made profits.
Yes, I think so.
They were running at a loss, but because they had deep pockets,
Yeah.
they were able to.
They are so rich. They are so rich.
Yeah, but now they have to. They are beginning to feel the real problem, especially when they have invested in a lot of those big airplanes, A380s. So after
Yeah,
COVID, a lot of airlines will go into smaller, more efficient aircrafts like the 787.
Oh, 787 Dreamliner.
Dreamliner, yes. That is most cost for now. That is the most cost efficient airplane.
Oh, they thought they have compared to Airbus 350, Prof.
Yes, and those two, 350 also, but still, well, the industry. I think those two are the most I think efficient, cost efficient.
Doctor, I have one question.
Yes, please.
Okay. Out there are people saying that our public service is bloated in structure and also have a very bureaucratic structure. So how, based on the doctor's experience, vast experience in service, so how doctors see this?
Well, to a certain degree, there are, I think, there are places where it is bloated. But if you were to look at, for example, the medical services, ask yourself, is it bloated? It is in fact understaffed, right? And of course, you need all those other essential services, although they may not be functional at all times, right? Take, for example, the army. People also say that the army makan gaji buta, right? The question is, what if there is no army when things like COVID-19 happens, right? What if there is no army what was the island? Sipadan.
Oh, Sipadan Island.
Right? So, yes, there are possibly places where it is bloated, where probably you may have too many support staff. But if you were to look at the executive position, you tell me whether you are having an easy time. I know a lot of PTDs work overtime beyond their working hours. Now, I wouldn't say that would be makan gaji buta, right? I know my past students sometimes work until 12. They work over weekends. They get calls from their bosses at 8 p.m. So to say that it is bloated might not be true.
Okay, thank you, doctor.
The thing is that in Malaysia, the government the government is the driver for most activities and industries in Malaysia, right? So somehow there's still that need for services, unless the private sector want to take over as being the driver of the economy, then only we can reduce the amount of civil servants. Again, this is just speculation by just looking into some rough estimates about what is happening. Agree with that, Zisheng?
Yeah, I agree, doctor. Actually, maybe that diagnostic process is still in progress, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we have to
level.
where there is not enough work to be done, I suppose. I'm sure there are places that happen that way. Overall, I think most people do more than their fair share of work.
Okay, thank you, doctor.
Doctor.
Yes.
Doctor, one last question from me.
Okay, no problem.
Since you have retired yesterday, my question would be, are you still in the service or are you working voluntarily now?
Well, I'm working right now part-time. So the position is actually part-time.
Oh, you are on contract with UPM?
With UPM, yes. So I'm just like Dr.
Okay.
Bahman, Professor Bahman, I suppose, working part-time. But even then, I have not had the chance to negotiate. All I know is that I started this class, I have to end the classes.
Okay, good then.
Yeah. So my
No,
position right now is part-time.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
By tomorrow, you should be checking your bank account already.
Yeah, hopefully,
The money should be, the duit raya should be in your account already within tomorrow.
Because you see the duit raya, because I retire before the 20th,
Oh,
which is today. I retire on the 18th, so I don't get the full duit raya. I only get
I mean not duit raya.
Yeah, I know. We're talking about the
gratuity.
I don't know yet whether it's in or not.
Oh, you have not checked it yet. Okay,
I haven't checked yet.
Okay, good.
Hopefully, Prof still happy to answer any question from us after this.
Anytime. Even
Thank you, Prof.
even after you've gone back to work, you're free to communicate with me.
Abang Lokman nak buat PhD tu. Abang Lokman dengan Fiza nak buat PhD tu.
Yeah, sure.
Fiza nak buat PhD tu.
Sure. As a teacher, my life will go on.
Yeah, thank you, Prof.
Okay then. So this is the week. The Hari Raya is probably on Sunday, right?
Yeah, insyaAllah.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me wish you all Selamat Hari Raya, maaf saya batik. I know you cannot balik kampung, so enjoy the time with your family. Most importantly, stay safe. Right? I will not be visiting anyone, and in fact will not be accepting visitors this year.
Okay, noted.
I mean, well, that's for everyone, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But duit raya still can transfer, Prof.
Oh yeah. So I'll give you my bank account.
And don't forget to pay zakat, everyone.
Yes, please do. Only 4 more days to go.
Yeah.
Okay then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Selamat Hari Raya, everyone.
Right.
Take care.
Hari Raya.
Okay, selamat
Yeah,
semua.
Prof. Terima kasih, Prof.
Selamat Hari Raya.
Maaf lahir dan batin.
Bye. Thank you.
Hari Raya
Baru nak
cepat
tunjuk
sikit.
muka.
Boy, happy.
Happy.
Happy, Prof.
Yes.
Tengok jagut pada Pak Jabor dah jadi kluster tablik dah aku ni.
Siapa? Siapa nama penyanyi tu? Hatan.
Hatan jauh, Hatan.
Ya. Boleh lah tu, boleh buat duit tu.
Boleh buat
Artis.
boleh buat bincang bro.
Ya.
Okay everyone, selamat hari raya. Jumpa
selamat
lagi.
raya.
Take care.
Okay, selamat raya je.
Bye.
Semua
Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
Okay, I'm going to switch off and end our meeting. Goodbye, everybody. Take care and have a wonderful Hari Raya break.